and being involved in government is, you hear people talk about stuff, but A, do they have the ability to get it done? And do they have a real record that it reflects their character and the like? I'm from Los Angeles, born in Los Angeles. I'm one of 5 boys. We grew up in Benedict Canyon initially. And as a kid, which seared my brain, I remember my mom loading up the station wagon with all the stuff on the roof and all the boys in the car going to my grandma's house in the Fairfax district when the Bel Air fires happened. And that kind of, as we relate to fire, it's something that's always been a part of who I am. My oldest brother has cerebral palsy, and when they wouldn't let him in public school. As a matter of fact, Brentwood used to be a military academy. If anybody's old enough to remember that, my brother went there when it was a military academy, and we went to Palm Springs where he could be the water boy on the football team like a regular kid. Came back to LA. I'm a lawyer by training for 43 years, and I've divided my life as a person into kind of 3 basic things. I've been deeply, deeply involved in the community. As a young kid, I was a driver for a guy named Merv Dimley, if anybody remembers him, who was lieutenant governor, first Black lieutenant governor, and was very deeply involved in South LA with Maxine Waters, Bill Green, Julian Dixon, Leon Ralph. And then Mervyn appointed me as chair of the youth commission some years ago. And I met a good friend of mine, Victor Grego, who was involved with Richard Altori and Artorez, and I started getting involved in the East Side. From a political perspective, what I like, what makes my heart sing, is the community, being involved, talking to people, getting engaged, listening deeply, and it's been informed everything that I've done since I've been in government. And so what happened is I didn't run for office until I was 42 years old. I ran for the assembly, my first office. I sat in a bunch of commissions. I was in the Productivity and Quality Commission at the county, the Board of Pharmacy, and a bunch of other things with Jess Unruh for the District Securities Commission, and been involved and spent a lot of time as a volunteer, both on campaigns and in that. But I ran in large measure, aside from a number of issues that we were able to be successful on. But I ran for office because I saw that so many people that I worked with who were nice and honorable people that working hard, they fell off the wagon when they got elected. And they got built into the system and got tied into all the fanfare of being an elected official. And they lost their way. And so I focused tremendously, in addition to education and building schools and all kinds of stuff that I did in the energy crisis, but I focused on building a Capital Institute. I became Speaker of the Assembly relatively quickly after Antonio Ramon Pedro Villaraigosa, and he was my roommate in Sacramento. And I chaired his campaign actually for Assembly in '94. But basically training people. We built the Capital Institute. Trained over 5,000 staff of, how does the budget work? How does this work? How the process work? So you understand more deeply, and train members. And I was the first speaker to get elected unanimously. And I share that with you because I think one of the core assets that I bring is bridge building from deeply divided communities. My opponent is, good person. I don't quarrel with any of that stuff, but she represents a very beautiful and wonderful, harmonious community of 1.9 square miles. I had to work with people from every corner of the state, every party, in order to figure out as leader to solve problems and get things done. When I left government, because I was so impacted by the energy crisis, I spent most of the next 12 years traveling the world, if you will, working on climate change and renewable energy. I formed a solar company on Martin Luther King Boulevard in South Los Angeles. First and only solar company that was made, sold that, went over to UK, built a company in Wales where I built solar from wind and did some crazy stuff. I was in Africa, India, China, and Sri Lanka, and all over. And I came back really for 2 reasons when Tony Cardenas and Padilla brought me back to come in and run for the Senate in 2014. Both of us, my opponent and I, have served about the same amount of time, her a little bit more than I have in government. But I came back to work on basically social justice issues. I worked on a whole host of criminal justice and social justice and climate change. I found, quite frankly, that the noise between all the press conferences that people were having and all these stupid things that they were doing wasn't really having an impact. And God's in the details in how I think. It's just how my mind works. How do you deal with transmission? How do you deal with resource adequacy? How do you deal with providers of last resort? The architecture of what it takes to make things work. And in state, I ultimately became the majority leader, which again had to have a very different responsibility than being a legislator, because I had to pull people together to get big stuff done. It's the reason why the governor's endorsing me, because he relied on me over and over and over again to get stuff done, to make things happen, rather than just give speeches about it. And the reason I'm running for Board of Supervisors, and I'll finish here, that's important, is because the county, by population, is larger than the state of Michigan. This is not local government. This is the local arm of the state government. The laws that the 51 departments, there's no foster care department in local government. There's no health care department except for San Francisco and Long Beach in local government. There's no probation. There's no public defenders. There's none of these other things. It's completely a creature of the state, financially and legally and constitutionally. And so the bottom line is that frustrated me. I wasn't going to run again. I was done. I had done my service. But what happened was we have plenty of money, man. We have so much dough, so many billions of dollars sitting around, and it wasn't getting spent. It wasn't getting done in the right way. We created the care court system, which is quite brilliant, that I'm a co-author of. And guess what? County says, oh, we're too soon. We're not going to do that. There's $116 million we did for a project in Hollywood. Oh, that 2.5 years ago, haven't spent a nickel. $2 billion sitting in the bank on mental health, not being spent. I know how to get it done. I know how to work with the governor. I'll talk to you specifically about ideas about how that interrelationship works between the state and the local government, or excuse me, the state and the county, which is literally the local arm of the state of California. Size of Michigan. This is not local government. The budget just went to $44 billion. So I can talk specifically about public safety and homelessness and the things that are on top of mind, which people like to talk about, which basically means polling. But what I think also is long-term. What are the problems that you solve that people don't know they have? How do we deal with the water issue? How do we deal with economic development as the tax structure goes up and down? I've lived through the downturns of what it's like when you have these gigantic cuts. And so I just, at a very deep personal level, I thought about it a lot, about what to do. And I just couldn't turn my back on the responsibility. So I'm coming in using that skill set that I bring, using those relationships. I'm friends with 31 members I serve with in the Congress, where we need to do congressional issues on waivers and the like. To Alex Padilla, who's endorsed me, United States Senator, who I work with very, very closely since he's been 20 years old. Go down the list, same thing with the governor and the like. And I just think that at the end of the day, those are the things that matter. The nature of the experience, the nature of what county government is. It's not local government by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll give you some other examples as we answer questions, but I've gone on too long. And I thank you for giving me so much time and listening, everybody.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. So just so everyone knows, we sent a series of questions. There are 10 questions to both candidates. This is how we had done it for the CD11 meet and greet as well. So they've got the questions. I will ask them. They're no doubt prepared for the answers. But I will say, Senator Hertzberg, we will not ask you number 7, because do you support the care court legislation that Governor Newsom recently signed into law? I'm going to say yes, because you were a co-author. Wonderful. All right. So just so everyone knows, we've roughly given everybody about a half an hour. So Senator Hertzberg, I'm not going to time you, but I am going to ask you to try to be as succinct as you can.
Okay.
So we'll start with the first one, and then if we run out of time, I'll cherry pick. What is your vision for the LA Sheriff's Department, particularly in terms of staffing size and authority of the sheriff? How large do you think that this law enforcement organization should be? And can you speak to some of their current circumstances?
Current circumstances are pretty crappy, but look, there's 684 positions that are vacant. Those should be filled. Period. We have the money to do it. The amount of money that's come in the budget is, we've just seen, increase 5.3% increase in sales. I mean, in taxes from property tax, and it's going to go up based upon how transfers are happening, even though the market's down because a lot of properties are being sold and the like. So there's plenty of money. It should be fully funded in terms of what the levels are. There's only been 3 academies in the last year. There should have been 8. And it's partly because of this tension that exists between the supervisors and the sheriff. Look, I don't like the guy. I didn't support him. I was a Jimmy McDonald person. I worked hard. Jimmy was here in the backyard, and we formed the website for his campaign in my backyard, and I worked hard for him. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that sheriff's doing, but what I'm not going to do, I'm sorry, and if people don't like it, then they don't like it. I am who I am, and I'm comfortable in my skin. I'm not calling a bunch of press conferences and screaming at people, because what I know in life, by working with Republicans and working with people from all corners of the state, you don't wake up in the morning and scream at somebody, and then at the end of the day, you're supposed to fix something. I work for you. My job is to park my ego at the door and fix problems, and I have to work with difficult and challenging people. And so So if the staffing level isn't high enough, it should be higher, because at the end of the day, man, it is bad. People are not safe. They do not feel safe. There's never a day that goes by that I don't have a story about people in their homes. I talked to today that told me a fella in Beverly Hills, both of his neighbors have been robbed. These Apple things, they do follow homes to tag you. The people I talked to, a high-level government official who says my wife won't even go out and orders online. People, don't wear their jewelry. I'm sorry, you can't have a society like that. It's critically important. So to me, it's one of the most important elements. I've endorsed by every single police organization that exists in this deal. And quite frankly, I got to tell you, I have been tough on the cops, and I'm really surprised that they endorse me personally, because, I was out there on bail. I'm the guy who did bail stuff, making sure that, if people were at flight risk or public safety risk, they shouldn't be left, but poor people shouldn't be hurt. I was there on decertification. 2 months negotiating that, issues on gangs, on sheriff gangs, issues on chokeholds and things like that. And I've had a lot of tough fights with them, but I think that they stuck with me because they know that I'm, it's how I approach problem solving, and I'm easy to work with, although I'm tough on issues. But I'm not someone who screams and yells at people. I'm someone who tries to fix stuff. Let me see if there's anything. Is there any other element of this I missed as I'm just thinking out loud with you?
No, I'm sure you'll get to it.
I do want to talk a little bit about the interrelationship with the sheriff and the city, the LA city, when we get a chance. So
okay, I'll give you some time to do that, and you'll have some closing time. So let's get to some of these important ones, because I know mental health is important to our audience, and so is fire safety, hazard zones, density housing. So let's get to it. What is your... I'm going to ask everybody to mute, please. Hold on. Senator Hertzberg, you're going to have to unmute yourself, because I'm going to mute everybody. Okay. So what is your approach to mental health services in general, and how will you manage the mentally ill or substance dependent people who are experiencing homelessness in LA County? Specifically, what would be your services and housing model for these individuals without losing sight of other subsets of the homeless population for whom quicker, less expensive interventions may stave off that long-term chronic homelessness, which is very expensive?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is kind of my philosophical approach towards homelessness and the like. So clearly, you've got to be compassionate to people. I get that. But I'm sorry, some of this stuff that's happened out there today, I just don't agree with. And if people agree or don't agree, so it is what it is. I believe in the 500-foot setback. I can't tell you how many people tell me they're walking over poop, over needles, where they're taking their kids to school. It's morally and horribly wrong. Second, as I said, I've been all over the world, and nothing, I mean, San Francisco maybe, but as bad as this is, it is gut-wrenching how bad it is. It's public health problem, it's a public safety problem, and it's not acceptable, and it informs a great deal of elements as to why I choose to run for this office. Now, what's the plan? I'm having a bunch of lawyers working for now as friends of mine, looking at the issue of what the power of the county is to declare a state emergency and what powers we have to deal with that, because we got to move quickly. People don't have confidence. They are sick and tired. There was this Blue Ribbon Commission report that was just done that I had to read twice. It was so painful to read. It basically says, well, we need another 39 months to figure out what we're going to do. And the city of Los Angeles says, sorry, Charlie, we're not going to participate. LA County, as I suggested, is 88 cities. You can be an elected official and be very prideful of the 40 people in your city and how you move them out. But this is a regional problem. You can't move people from city A to city B. It has to be done regionally in terms of homelessness and mental health. Absolutely critical. You guys with your task force have done a pretty good job in terms of your volunteerism and helping bring people to services, but it's peanuts in terms of what we have to do at all corners of the county. So one, in addition to looking at the state of emergency, I'm looking at pilot legislation in Los Angeles County that gives real responsibility to supervisors and elected officials, not czars, not staffers, not LASA. I think that LASA model doesn't work. It's just LA and the city. It doesn't work. Santa Monica put so much money in. Malibu put so much money in taxpayers. They should be at the table. Long Beach is larger than the city of Boston. They should be at the table. Wow. So, it's larger than Boston. Is that amazing? I mean, this is so big. And so, I've been involved in the issues very much. My ex-wife was the head of the Spanish-speaking neuropsychiatric clinic at UCLA, and was the head of the dual diagnosis commission at the county many years ago, and been, I've been working with her on this stuff and a whole host of other folks. I'm part of the mental health caucus in Sacramento. But bottom line is, we've got $2 billion in cash from the Steinberg money sitting in the tank. And I talk to Steinberg all the time, like, how come we can't get this money? I've talked to people at the county. It makes my head explode to think about it. We, as I suggested, we put $116 million into a mental health program that a bunch of people went to Italy and looked at this Tristi. I don't know if I pronounced the word properly. It was 2.5 years ago, and we've done nothing. It's like, are you kidding me? It's the whole argument that we're giving you the check and you're doing nothing. So the answer to the question with respect to mental health, we just put $1 billion in the budget for community colleges to train mental health professionals because we don't have enough. Clearly, we need to put people on the streets so people aren't met on the street when they're having an episode with a gun and a billy club and handcuffs. They've got to be met with mental health professionals. But that means instead of the people that we now have in LA that go from 6 in the morning till 3 and they don't work weekends or holidays, it's a 24/7 approach that works in partnership with the police. The police often need to show up because of violent episodes. The care courts in terms of taking care of people, tiny homes, I'm a big believer because we've got to move quickly to get people off the street, making sure people stay in their house and don't become homeless through the covenants that don't expire that we've been working on with Jesse Gabriel. The list is so long, it's hard for me. I know I've already gone on too long, but I have a depth and dimension. I would not be stupid enough to think I could run for this office if I didn't feel I could solve the problem. And so I will deal with this and happy to talk to anybody in a more deeper level, that want to talk about it. But I hope I give you some top line thinking about how I approach the problem.
You did excellent. Thank you. So we're going to talk about density and the fact that we're in a high fire severity zone. State bills that mandate additional density, such as SB 9 and other housing legislation, are seen in communities like ours as top-down directives that don't take local circumstances into consideration. In Pacific Palisades, these kinds of bills endanger lives and property, inevitably impacting the limited evacuation routes that we have for ingress and egress. Knowing this, how would you support communities like ours when it comes to increasing housing density? And would you support an unconditional exemption for our very high fire severity zones?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I'm a straight up person. I voted for SB 9, okay? I want to tell everybody, I don't dance around the edges. I never do and never will. Now, let me give you some context and I'll talk about the severity zones in terms of fire. Scott Wiener had a bill, SB 50. I killed it. Ask anybody who was on the floor. I killed that because it was killing neighborhoods and I hated it. Basically allowed for 14 units up to the thing. My opponent, supported by the YIMBY groups that sponsored this. I was against it. And I was majority leader, which means I'm number 2 to the pro tem. And I got in a bunch of trouble and Scott would go and complain, but we stopped that. Second, he comes back the next year and did SB 10, which was basically SB 50, but it was voluntary. I still opposed that in committee. He complained to the pro tem, why is your majority leader doing this? And I still was going to get on the floor and argue against SB 10, but my mother died that night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I still came to work at 6 in the morning to Sacramento. And I wasn't in a position to argue against it. I just wasn't emotionally there. As you might imagine, everybody on this call was pretty tough. SB 9 I voted for. And the reason I voted for it is because you make tough decisions in government. I had many behind the door conversations with the pro tem, and I would have, as I had done in a couple of other instances, offered up my resignation when I opposed her on things because I worked for her as the majority leader. But I didn't do it this time. And I didn't do it this time, despite some, we were able to do a lot of amendments to fix it a little bit, but it's still challenging. And I didn't like it, but I did vote for it because I had to make a calculated risk. I couldn't have stopped it. She was the pro tem. It was her bill. So I was going to go and make a decision where I had $25 million for Cal State Northridge, $5.7 million for homeless facility for Jewish family services, money and all kinds of projects that I was able to bring to the community that I thought were important. I would have lost them all. And I made the calculated risk. I told her, and she said, tell everybody blame me. I said, I'm not going to say that, but I'll take the hit for it. But I made the calculated risk. And sometimes in government, you have to make tough choices. And I will make those tough choices. And I'll tell the truth about those tough choices. And that's why I did it. I don't like it. Now, with respect to the high fire severity zones, I do support the exemption. I tried to work with Henry to get it done. I couldn't get it done. It was that simple. I do support that exclusion. I think it's an intelligent thing. I think the city of Los Angeles has done a great job with respect to their plan for evacuations. And I think that it was very important, going to my point about the cooperation between the sheriff and the city. It's very important whether, one of the things that I did some years ago with Howard Berman was I passed in a measure on the ballot that allowed for communications. The radios with county sheriffs and LAPD didn't talk to each other. So we put the money in to do that, to be able to talk to each other. And I would agree that I would suggest that what we do is create more cooperation with the city and county law enforcement, so that if you need to tow cars to get people out for evacuations, if you need to be able to work in coordination with the very good plan that the city has, we should be partners there. One of the things that I did, last thing I'll end with you here, is that I think that the law enforcement element of how we approach law enforcement has to be much more cooperative and not competitive. One of the things that took me 11 years to do and $140 million just to build the largest crime lab in the country that's located at Cal State LA. And my significant other is the director of the School of Criminology and Criminalistics. What we were able to do, which was no one thought we could do, was to basically get the LA sheriff and the LAPD working together. That crime lab is the state, the school, the sheriff, and the LAPD. Cooperation on crime solving and doing those kinds of things. And more of what we can do, particularly in the high fire severity zones, would be very, very important, plus some other elements that would support cooperation.
So the reason that that question comes up is that when these bills come to us down at the city and the community level, we tend to oppose them, and we go out and we look for a coalition to help us oppose them, right? So there are regional alliances, and we go to our city people, we go to our city council members and our mayor, and obviously we would go to our county rep. And so it's important to know if you'd be in our alliance. And it sounds
I'm
like
in your alliance. I'm in your alliance. And people want to beat me up and say I voted for it. Fine, it's a true statement, but it's not an accurate statement in terms of who I am.
Okay, got it. So we are facing an unprecedented drought. What are your plans to address the needs of LA County as we face this drought? And what innovations are you thinking you might be able to employ?
Well, let me tell you, I wrote my dissertation on water undergraduate. I was a history major, and I've been involved in water my whole life. I've done every year in the legislature, I always do water bills. I did a bill one year just for, I call them diarrhea bills. At the end of session, I did a bill that said it's against the law to put water in the ocean. And I did it to kind of take the political industrial complex of the water world and throw it on its end. Why did I do that? We're in a situation where we put 3 million gallons of water a day out of Hyperion after we clean it up to federal standards. We have a pipe going 3 miles out to the ocean. If you go to my office, my office on the door, it's called the William Mulholland Room. On my door is a big color picture of all the places in LA County where you can recharge the groundwater. What I want to do is to take those pipes and turn them around and bring them in and to recharge the groundwater. 550,000 acre feet, which is about how much water the city uses, we can capture that goes back into the ocean. In addition, in Carson, I've been involved for the last number of years and just got $52 million in the budget for it, for a recycling facility that does the LA sanitation districts and metropolitan water districts. I've been involved for the last number of years with Orange County, 130,000 acre feet of water that they're recycling in Orange County. It's really the platinum standard. Water is my world, and I love it, and I work hard on it. And so I wasn't supportive of Measure W. Why? Because Measure W is brilliant in that it cleans up the water that comes through the sewage, through the stormwater system, but there was no element to capture the water. So what are we doing? Another stupid thing. Yes, it helps Santa Monica. Yes, it helps the water quality and the like, critically important, but it missed the most important element: capture the water and recharge the groundwater. And so my innovation is all about doing that. The other thing, by the way, is 2-3 years ago with Jerry Brown, we did conservation as a way of life. Me and Laura Friedman, as a member of the legislature from the Burbank-Glendale area. I just did another conservation bill that was very hard to get through. One of the reasons I missed a bunch of votes at the end of session, because I was over in the other house getting this water conservation bill done. To make sure that we conserve water. So I have been deeply involved in this issue. And one of the big reasons why I'm running for supervisor in terms of my own internal thinking was dealing with this water issue in a very big way. I served on the 50-year plan for Metropolitan Water District. Their plan for 50-year planning. I worked on the lining of the All-American Canal. I worked on the jurisdictions of the Quantification Settlement Agreement, which is the 7 states that deal with the Colorado River. And I've been to probably every water district in the state of California. And I used to be the chairman of the Water Committee of the Senate. So this is an area that I love.
Water. Okay, got it. You'll be proactive on water.
Yes, right. That's the conclusion.
theoretically, I only have you for another minute and I have a few more questions. So obviously we're not going to get to them. I will ask you to answer them in writing and I can send it out to the board and to the community, but I will ask you a couple of last ones. This one is a yes, no question, Senator Hertzberg. Do you support or would you support the use of any portion of public parks or beaches, including Will Rogers State Beach, which is right down the road from us, for homeless shelter or housing? So yes,
No. No.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to ask you to do this one really quickly, but how prepared is LA County for handling a major disaster in the hillside and coastal zones? I don't want you to go into a whole theory because it's going to take you a while and you probably won't know until you get there, but if you have something to say. But the important one I want you to answer, and then we'll have to bid farewell to you, is how is your homelessness plan different, better, more effective than your opponents?
Well, I would suggest that it's informed by understanding how to get stuff done at the state and federal levels at a much deeper level where my relationships are to make stuff happen. I think that whether it's the state of emergency, whether it's getting, I don't know if my opponent has the ability to get a law passed in California, but you need a law passed that's what's called a bill that's just for the LA County. Because as speaker, when you go and ask somebody in Solana Beach or in Imperial County for a vote, well, that doesn't work for me. I have a pretty good sense of the architecture of making that work. And I would suggest at the end of the day, plans are plans, but can you get it done? And that's the key. And that's the test I put myself to. And that's what I know how to do to make it happen. And I have a deep record on 100 issues, whether it's privacy or go down the list of the stuff I just did for plastics recycling with Ben Allen, spent 30 days. Well, everybody else was campaigning for office and I spent the time doing my ethical obligation of doing the homework to make stuff happen. And that's where the work gets done. That's how decisions are made. And that's where my experience level is significant as both Speaker of the House and Majority Leader of the Senate and endorsed by a governor who totally embraces and understands my ability to get things done.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Hertzberg. It was a pleasure to host you at PPCC and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I will send the remaining, I think maybe 3 questions to your campaign.
Okay.
But we got a flavor. We got the best. We put out our most important questions and we got our most important answers. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Captain. Thanks, everybody. Brian.
All right, Lindsey Horvath, I know you're on the call. Welcome to the Pacific Palisades Community Council. We are happy to have you here. I'm going to find you in the squares and give you a spotlight. Lindsey,
I'm here.
Thank you.
Nice
Horvath,
to see you all.
ladies and gentlemen, is the city council member for West Hollywood, and I will spotlight her. Lindsey, give us, I think I said I would give 4 minutes of opening statement time, so I'm sure you'll be timely. Give us your opening statement and then we'll go into questions.
You got it. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you this evening with all that's taking us in different directions these days. I appreciate you spending this time, effort, and energy to really understand what's at stake in the race for county supervisor, because this seat is so incredibly important into how we are served at the local level. I've served at the local level now for about 15 years in my own city, and I've also served as president of California Contract Cities Association, in the executive leadership for the Clean Power Alliance in the county, on the state and national board for the League of Cities. And I've always, no matter what level I've been serving at, I've always been focused on local issues and believe strongly in local control. I have seen as a mayor and as president of California Contract Cities during this time of crisis, where the county met the moment and where it simply failed. And even before this time of crisis, I saw where the county really struggled to meet us directly in our own cities, in our own neighborhoods. And when it is the social safety net that's supposed to provide us with the services and care that we need, with the resources we need to tackle the challenges of homelessness and safety and addressing climate change and protecting our environment, getting people back to work and good jobs that afford themselves and their families a good quality of life, building out our regional transportation infrastructure and connecting people to jobs and to healthcare. I mean, these are some of the primary responsibilities of the supervisor. And our supervisor Yaroslavsky actually came from local government, and I think that's what helped him to succeed in that role. And so I'm eager to bring my experience from local government to this role as well. I have in my own community, we've developed a program that has about an 80% success rate getting people off the streets and into housing services, or both. I know you're going to ask me a question about that, so I'll save the details for later. But I actually have a plan, unlike my opponent, and it's one that has proven to be effective. When we asked the county about 4 years ago to come meet with us to talk about this urgent homelessness crisis that we were seeing already 4 years ago, we were told at that time that the only thing they could do, we asked what we weren't doing, and they said, actually, we need to be doing what you're doing, which was nice to hear, but incredibly frustrating, because we had a plan that was working, and here we are 4 years later, and they're still not doing it. I have worked at the local level also with the Sheriff's Department, where I have served as now the chair of the board for the Liability Trust Fund Claims Board and Oversight Committee, which is the committee that oversees the deputy involved incidents and liability cases for all of the cities that contract with the Sheriff's Department. So I have experience both working with our Sheriff's Department in my own community and throughout the county. And I have experience working collaboratively with them to help fully fund the backlog of untested rape kit evidence. My opponent likes to talk about his work building the crime lab, and he funded it just enough to get his name on the building, but he actually didn't make sure that the resources that were needed inside to do the work were invested. And so I worked with the community coalition in partnership with Mayor Villaraigosa, Council President Eric Garcetti, and others to make sure that funding in the city of Los Angeles came to fruition in that budget. And I worked with Supervisor Yaroslavsky to help fund the backlog of untested rape kit evidence throughout Los Angeles County. It is that kind of hands-on work, delivering and implementation of the policies, that is important at the local level. And that's what we need from a county supervisor. This isn't just about throwing money at problems, saying, oh, I have this or that relationship. It's about directly investing the resources that we have in LA County, $40 billion in our annual budget, to make sure that we're realizing change on the ground. And so I know that we have a lot of questions to get through. I'll stop there to make sure we have time for closing remarks also.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being mindful of time. That was exactly on time. So I'm going to run through questions. We'll see how we do with time with you too, but we'll get the important ones in. What is your vision for the LA Sheriff's Department, particularly in terms of staffing, size, and authority? How large do you believe that this law enforcement agency should be? And can you speak to some of their current woes?
Yes, of course. We need to make sure that the sheriff is in charge of the staffing. The relationship between the county board and the sheriff is that the county board provides the funding, but the sheriff determines how it is spent. And so we need to have a collaborative relationship between the county board of supervisors and the sheriff over the entire department, to ensure that we're funding what is needed within the department, and we're not wasting money on things that are problems within the department, like deputy gangs, like the waste that we see on liability cases when we ask law enforcement to respond to calls for service for which they are not uniquely trained. We absolutely must fully invest in the ability of law enforcement to respond to violent crime and issues for which they are uniquely trained. We've seen speed racing issues, all kinds of things going on in our neighborhoods that we need law enforcement to respond to, and they need the resources to do that. And every year in my own budget locally, we've actually invested more in public safety spending, and we contract with the Sheriff's Department. This year, we actually authorized the largest contract ever in the history of our city to make sure that we're spending enough money to address the issues of crime and safety in our community. But we also need to make sure that we support the Sheriff's Department with resources like unarmed security ambassadors, mental health professionals who go out on calls for service for which the department is not uniquely trained. One of the things that I authored in my city was a contract with what's called a mental evaluation team, which is based in the Sheriff's Department, but pairs a clinically trained social worker with the deputy. So on calls for service, like a 5150 or a homelessness call, the social worker leads on the call. They're able to diagnose someone and get them into treatment and care rather than jailing them simply for being unhoused. This is a contract that I authored that is now available to every community throughout Los Angeles County. And we need to expand the number of mental evaluation teams responding to calls for service so we can help make sure that the calls are actually being responded by people who have the qualifications. I support Measure A to make sure that there is accountability in the Sheriff's Department. I don't think our sheriff should be ignoring subpoenas or ignoring our Civilian Oversight Commission. I think that we need a sheriff who wants to work collaboratively with the board. Whomever gets elected, though, I'm prepared to work with them and make sure that the department delivers for safety in our communities.
Excellent. Thank you. That model sounds very effective. The contract model that you were just referring to. What is your approach to mental health services in general, and how will you manage the mentally ill or substance dependent people who are experiencing homelessness in LA County? Specifically, what would be your service and housing model for these individuals without losing sight of other subsets of the homeless population for whom quicker and less expensive interventions may stave off long-term chronic homelessness?
So there's a lot in there. So if I get to go too long and you want me to loop it into another question, just let me know. First, we have over $1 billion already in LA County sitting in a bank directly allocated to investment in mental health care services that hasn't been spent. That's over $1 billion with a B dollars just sitting in a bank account. And when we see the mental health crisis that's on our streets, I think that's unconscionable. We need to make sure that those dollars are directly and quickly invested in our community to make sure that the services that these people need are provided in rapid order, to make sure that they're delivered right in our community, to make sure that we're getting people off the streets and into the care that they need. On the campaign trail, I've already identified at least 3 locations who are able to, one in Santa Monica, 2 in the Valley, that are able to open up mental health beds tomorrow if the county provides this funding to them. The issue has been the bureaucracy that is required to apply for these mental health services. I've heard from countless agencies that the bureaucracy is so great and so impossible to navigate that they just seek outside private foundation funding and private funding for these services because they don't want to work with the county. That's not right. We count on the county to deliver these services. Supervisor Janice Hahn, who has endorsed me in this race, has a plan that she's started to bring forward in the county that would create mental health urgent care facilities in every community or in communities dispersed throughout the county, so that way people can access mental health care services right in their own neighborhoods. And this will help not just those who are in most urgent need of mental health care, but also those who need routine help. And this will help to destigmatize accessing mental health care, which we know, especially after this time of crisis, we all need a little bit of support. We've seen our first responders and healthcare providers burning out in their jobs because of the care that they have been providing, and because they haven't been provided that care themselves. We've seen our young people suffering from mental health issues and extreme depression. We've seen reported in the LA Times. These are issues that the county mental health department needs to be proactively addressing. And most importantly, we have to make sure there's a pipeline into this sector going forward, making sure that there's training in our community colleges, that we recruit in neighborhoods throughout the county. So we have service providers who look like the diversity of our county, and people are able to receive those services from people who have their shared lived experience and with whom they can form trust.
Excellent. Thank you. Moving on to housing density. State bills that mandate additional density, such as SB 9 and other housing legislation, are seen in our communities like ours, as top-down directives that don't take local circumstances into consideration. In Pacific Palisades, these kinds of bills endanger lives and property, inevitably impacting the limited evacuation routes we have. Knowing this, how would you support communities like ours when it comes to increasing or not increasing housing density? And would you support an unconditional exemption for the very high fire severity zones?
I absolutely support that exemption. I think it's unwise for us to continue building in areas that have further endangered people, and I'm disappointed that that hasn't been done already. But I do know that we also, and in my community, we opposed SB 9 because we support local control, and we saw that one-size-fits-all policies coming down from Sacramento into our neighborhoods don't deliver the results that they intend, and they actually deliver unintended consequences that create more problems than they solve. We have developed local housing policy in my community that has allowed us to reach our arena numbers, but also keep the density in the places where it makes most sense, while keeping it out of the neighborhoods that can't handle that density. And I think that's the right kind of approach. We need to be having these conversations locally, informed by our neighborhoods, with active participation from our local groups, just like you. Ultimately, land use authority and those land use decisions will reside with your city council member. So the county doesn't necessarily have the same kind of role that your city council member will, but I will work to make sure that your voices are heard in that process, and that whenever the county is involved in a land use decision, that I'm listening with both with my staff, with our county staff, and every department that is involved in any of these land use decisions, to make sure your concerns are heard and addressed as projects move forward.
Wonderful, thank you. What is your understanding of the staffing and training status of our fire mitigation and emergency preparedness agencies? And again, I posed this question to Senator Hertzberg also, and you may not know until you get in there, but how prepared is Los Angeles County for a hillside or coastal disaster?
Well, I do know that when it comes to fire safety response from our dispatch center, that they are in the process of undergoing upgrades. They expect these upgrades for the CAD system to be fully implemented by August of 2024. But we know that between now and then, there could certainly be cause for concern. God forbid there is an issue. There is coordinated effort to make sure that our fire department has the ability to respond. But there isn't currently a plan to increase the number of dispatchers in that center. Right now, we have the same staffing level in LA County that has existed for the past 25 years. We know that there are far too many issues that are coming up now. There's no longer fire season. It's a risk that we face in our communities each and every day. And so we need to make sure that there's full integration of this new system, which will allow LA County Fire to respond and dispatch off of GPS and fully integrate with Orange and Ventura counties on response. We know that LA County Fire has been called upon through the State Department to make sure that they're responding in areas where Cal Fire is responsible, but LA County needs the backup when they do that response. So we also need to make sure that first responders have preeminence in telecommunications, which is why LA RICS has been further developed by LA County system, and make sure that they're able to respond and communicate with folks, because we've heard the disasters when the PSPS have happened and people can't communicate because their energy has been shut off. That being said, in terms of prevention, we do need to work on our infrastructure, make sure that in all cases that we can underground our utilities, to make sure that we're protecting our communities from infrastructure being the cause of fires. And I've actually worked to make sure that Southern California Edison, which is the IOU that serves the area around Los Angeles, does not allow their undergrounded equipment to come above ground. It was actually something they were trying to slip in as a red line at the Public Utilities Commission that I caught back in 2009. And I have the experience working and holding them accountable to do that. But we also have to make sure that the zone haven evacuation plan that LA County is working on, which will include pre-designated evacuation routes, repopulation plans, and training through LA County Fire and the Sheriff's Department, are fully realized. And so these are some of the areas that we need to focus on the county level. There needs to be coordination, of course, between County Fire and Los Angeles City Fire Department as well. There's all kinds of plans that are in place to help empower individual homeowners. We have to make sure you have the resources to harden your homes, and to make sure that we're addressing the insurance costs that people face who live in these areas. I know there was legislation that was just recently passed, and I will make sure that we have staffing in our office so that when people are applying for this funding that is supposedly available at the state, that you don't run into issues like we've seen seen during COVID, where people were applying for unemployment or trying to get support for their rent and covering those housing costs. But sometimes they submitted a Word doc instead of a PDF and it didn't get accepted, or the instructions were very unclear. I'll make sure that we have staff in our office to work with folks, so you have the availability of those resources right here in LA County.
Excellent, thank you.
Mhm.
So about drought, what would you do to address the needs of a county that's facing an unprecedented drought, and what innovations would you employ?
Well, unlike my opponent, I did support Measure W because I think it is important that we keep the Santa Monica Bay clean, that we're addressing water quality issues, and that we are further investing in infrastructure. One thing that hasn't been done, though, since Measure W was passed, the plans are outlined very clearly on the county's website. I think it's one of the best examples of transparency and accountability in terms of which projects are moving forward. They just aren't moving forward fast enough. I think one piece that's been missing, however, is the education piece, to make sure that our local communities are aware of what projects are coming forward and how they will impact their communities. I've been meeting with different water districts that serve the various areas of our LA County district, and we have to make sure that they're working together. Ideally, the more that we can increase access to local water, recycling water, making sure that we're investing in efficiency upgrades and retrofits is very important. But I also know, for example, through the city of Beverly Hills Water Department, they have developed an MOU with the state of Israel on water technology, so that way their technological innovations can benefit the Beverly Hills Water District. And so I've been talking with them about how they can share that information and potentially expand access to that MOU to the other water districts, like the Las Virgenes Water District and other districts in our area, to make sure that everyone is benefiting from this knowledge and technology, so that we can implement innovations in real time and address the concerns that we certainly see coming forward.
Excellent, thank you. The next two questions are yes/no questions. Would you support the use of any portion of public parks or beaches, including Will Rogers State Beach, for homeless shelter or housing?
No.
Okay, and then do you support the care court legislation that Governor Newsom recently signed into law?
Yes, I will also say, though, I want to make sure that it is implemented in a way that we're not abusing people's civil rights, that we are using it as it's intended, to make sure that we're helping people with this new system of care.
Yeah. Okay, what specific steps would you take on day one of your administration to begin addressing the homeless crisis in LA County? So day one, week one, month one, what is your vision?
Absolutely.
You can roll this into 9, because 9 is, how is your plan different from your opponent's?
Well, my plan's different because I actually have a plan, but I also know that from firsthand experience, what works, what doesn't. We've learned through trial and error. I'm not afraid to get something wrong. I'm just afraid that we don't do enough to make the change that's needed in our neighborhoods. We have to make sure that LAHSA and all departments that are involved in addressing issues of homelessness are effective. And if they're not, we have to change them. I would like to see LAHSA be eliminated personally, because I don't think it's delivering the results that we expected. It was created as a result of a court decision. I'm told by county council that because it was a result of a court decision, that it's not that simple, that it needs to exist. Whether it's that or a new entity, I think we need to be tasking not bureaucrats with this responsibility, but I'm stepping up and asking for this responsibility, and I should be held accountable as your next supervisor. We need to be having publicly noticed meetings with the elected officials with whom you've entrusted this authority to demonstrate where public dollars are being spent on a weekly basis in real time. So, measure H dollars, measure HHH dollars, mental health services, housing and homelessness dollars, where they're being spent in your neighborhood and to what effect. So we're not waiting years for there to be feedback and results delivered in our communities. Instead, we need to have street teams that go out every day of the week, connecting with people on the streets and moving them into housing services and care that our communities provide and that the county provides. In my city, we have street teams through our social service contracted agencies because the county services weren't getting to the people that we needed to see the services provided. And these contracts that we have are with service providers who also contract with the county. So we know that the county trusts them. And every time we've invested in them more, they've been able to staff up, scale up, and move in real time. That's important. And they also hire people who themselves were unhoused. So there's trust there. And I think that's contributed to where they've had success. We need to make sure that we're providing transportation, connecting folks to housing, getting them into mental health treatment, getting them into addiction recovery services if that's what's needed. But all of these services exist in LA County. They need to be expanded. We shouldn't be requiring that all the jobs that are needed to address this time of crisis exist within LA County. Instead, I want to get the dollars out of that bureaucracy and directly invested in the services that are providing the solutions in our own neighborhoods and make sure that they have the resources they need to act in real time. So day one, I'm going to see what we can do about addressing the issues that exist in LAHSA. I will propose a plan that constitutes a new body that is directly accountable and call upon my colleagues to authorize weekly notice meetings that are noticed to the public and accountable directly in the dollars and cents that are invested in these efforts, and make sure that you know exactly how public dollars are delivering in your neighborhoods. That kind of accountability is required before we ask for another cent from you, from the state, from the federal government. And I think it will give more public trust so people actually understand what these services are providing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsey. The last question is, what endorsements are you most proud of and why? What did they say about you?
Well, I'm most proud, honestly, of all of my local government endorsements. I'm endorsed by over 100 local leaders and neighborhood leaders. And I think that's most important in this race because the district is so enormous. These districts in LA County cover such diverse interests, diverse populations, and diverse challenges. And so when people in their community say, I trust you to be my partner and making sure that my community, my neighborhood has the resources and support that it needs. I think that's the highest compliment we can get. And so I'm endorsed by over 100 local officials. I'm also proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I'm the only candidate endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I'm the only candidate endorsed by any pro-choice organization. And that is because of my record of commitment on this issue. I believe LA County needs to invest in the infrastructure needed for our residents here in LA County and for people who come from anywhere throughout the country to make sure that they get the resources right here in LA County. I supported the opening of a Planned Parenthood health center in my own city after the attack in Colorado Springs that took place a few years back. Even before I was serving on the city council, I worked on with the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project to make sure low-income women had access to funding for abortions. So this is something that I care about most passionately. I'm also proud to be the only candidate endorsed by the Sierra Club, by the Sunrise Movement, by the Center for Biological Diversity, the League of Conservation Voters here in Los Angeles, as well as Cal Environmental Voters, and a whole host of other climate organizations. I'm the only candidate endorsed by any climate organization because of my commitment on the climate and my commitment to be a strong partner on these issues. And I think it's important to raise this issue because my opponent has taken more than $250,000 from polluters. He was rated by Cal Environmental Voters as the lead of the polluter caucus, and they actually took the extraordinary step to endorse in a local race when they typically focus on state level races because they've seen the issues that he's caused in Sacramento, and it's cause for concern that we would have somebody come to LA County and bring that behavior and that record of policy to Los Angeles County. We need a climate champion, not someone who's going to put us further at risk. And that's what I intend to be, and your partner in those issues. So I'm very proud to be a leader on the issues that I think most people are concerned about as we move forward in the next 4 years in LA County.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much. You were timely. You answered all of our questions, and I, for one, very much appreciate them. And thank you for the rundown that you just gave us last for your endorsements. I have to say, we did not get a chance to ask Senator Hertzberg, although we had sent the questions to him. I will, just so the board knows, I will ask him to send that response to us so that we can all be informed about his endorsements and what they say about him as well. Lindsay, good luck on this race. It's down to the wire. So I'm grateful to both you and Senator Hertzberg for making the time to come to PPCC today. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. And if I may, I will put my email in the chat. If we didn't get to a question that people had, I know we both had the same list of questions, but if anybody has any other concerns that they'd like to discuss, please don't hesitate to reach out and make sure your question is answered. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.